What's up? Doc Mike. Public Health on Call. By Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Today's topic for April 25, 2021. Why the U.S. needs a Marshall Plan for vaccines with Congressman Jake Auchincloss. Thank you, Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health.
Welcome to Season 3 of Public Health on Call, a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. I'm Josh Sharfstein, Vice Dean for Public Health Practice and Community Engagement and a former Secretary of Maryland's Health Department. Our goal is to bring scientific evidence and experience to the public health news of the day through informative interviews with scientists, community leaders, policy experts, public health officials, clinicians, and more. If you have ideas or questions for us to cover, please email us at publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Smith-Rogers, producer of Public Health on Call. Today, Stephanie Desmond talks to Congressman Jake Auchincloss, a Massachusetts Democrat, about how the United States' place on the world stage depends on rapidly expanding COVID-19 vaccine manufacturing beyond what we need and sharing vaccines with low and middle income countries. Let's listen.
Congressman Jake Auchincloss, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me on.
So we're going to talk today about vaccine. And we keep hearing in the news about the vaccine rollout in the United States, where everyone's anxious at the moment to get vaccines. And a third of the people have already had a shot. And the president says everyone who wants one will soon have access to one. The situation is different in other places in the world. And I'm wondering if you could talk me through the situation as you see it.
The most important paradigm for this pandemic right now is the race between vaccinations and variants. We are getting shots into arms at a rapid clip in the United States and in Great Britain and in Israel, less so in other parts of the world, and I'll address that in a second. But as we are getting shots into arms, we are racing against the mutation of the virus itself. In unvaccinated populations, especially ones that are densely co-located, there is a high rate of mutation and new variants are emerging. Some of these variants, like the UK variant or even the South Africa variant, are largely addressed by vaccines and are not significantly more lethal or contagious, although somewhat more so. But some of them, like the Brazil variant, really are a problem. And we're seeing that right now in my home state of Massachusetts, and unfortunately soon in most parts of the country. Every time a new variant emerges, it's a game of Russian roulette. Maybe this new variant will be addressed by current vaccines, but maybe it won't be. Maybe it'll be entirely uncaptured by the existing vaccines, and we're going to be right back on our heels for a pandemic. So this race between vaccinations and variants is existentially important. And what's critical to understand is that we can't win it nationally. We are going to win or lose this thing globally. So like every other American, I am thrilled that we're having 3 million to 5 million shots a day for the next week or two, and going into May. And as the president has said, that we'll have enough vaccines for all Americans by May and reach herd immunity by the summer. That's fantastic. But the rest of the world's not on track to reach herd immunity until 2023. And that is too many rounds of Russian roulette for my liking.
So how do you suppose we can address that?
The good news is that we are starting to address it. The Biden administration gave $4 billion to COVAX, which is the global vaccination facility. It basically is a clearinghouse between the private sector and governments to source and distribute vaccines. The approval of Johnson & Johnson's vaccine, is incredibly important because it doesn't have the same cold storage logistics requirements as the mRNA vaccines do, and it's only one dose. That's a big deal. Johnson & Johnson obviously is a major manufacturing powerhouse that can produce hundreds of millions of vaccines this year. So there are good news events happening. However, we're still not on track to reach herd immunity until 2023. And to solve that, it's not just a money problem, and it's actually not even a vaccine problem, meaning the actual introduction of new types of vaccines. It's really a manufacturing bandwidth problem. Literally the actual equipment and even the trained personnel to produce enough of these biologics. I think probably most of our listeners, and certainly me up until a couple of months ago, don't really have a sense in our head of what it actually means to produce a vaccine. Like, what does that look like on the factory floor? And I'd encourage people to Google and actually watch the process because it's awe-inspiring. I mean, it truly is a demonstration of the glory of science. You are growing a biologic, you're growing a living thing, and it's incredible, but it's also really hard. And it doesn't happen overnight. We're not going to online a huge amount of manufacturing bandwidth overnight to produce enough vaccines really quickly. We got to start now in the expectation that we can finish this process in 2022. And so to give people a sense of the scale of the effort here, the private sector in the last 18 months or so 12 months, has already tripled its manufacturing of vaccines. So it's doing a lot. Now we need the public sector to step up and to directly start investing in the creation of biomanufacturing hubs here in the United States and potentially even abroad.
What is the United States' responsibility to the world here?
I think it's two dimensions. One is this is in our self-interest as a country. As I said, you are going to win or lose the race between vaccines and variants globally. There is no such thing as a country that wins it at home and loses it abroad and is still winning. It doesn't work like that. This is the classic the public comments at a global scale. Very similar to climate change in that respect. So one is just self-interest. I want to, as every other American does, wants to be able to live in a healthy, globalized economy that works in the 2020s, and we won't without solving this. But number two is this is a chance for us to reclaim moral leadership after the depredations of the Trump administration. The world still looks to America to lead in times of crisis. We stepped up after World War II with the Marshall Plan that helped Europe rebuild, and the returns on investment, both economically and geostrategically, are hard to quantify, but massive. We would see something similar here. It could be an exemplar of how we do it with climate change. And it would also be an opportunity for us to compete with China's aggressive vaccine diplomacy. For example, China is in our own geopolitical backyard in Brazil, trying to extract concessions in exchange for shipments of vaccines, including access for Huawei in Brazil's 5G broadband space. We should instead be teaming up with developing countries to build partner public health capabilities and be an agent of change for good, not an extractive agent.
So is it hurting the United States, do you think, that Russia and China and others are out there sharing their vaccine with the world?
Yes, it is hurting the United States. Where there is a vacuum of leadership and where there's a vacuum of aid, it's going to get filled, and it's up to us whether it gets filled by a country that tries to build up our partners' capabilities and to do so in a way that is, I would say, good for both sides, or whether we're going to allow China to make it a zero-sum game that benefits China in the short term. And, we saw this, frankly, even before the pandemic with the Chinese Communist Party's Belt and Road Initiative. They were investing huge sums of money in infrastructure in their near abroad, as well as in Africa. And is that beneficial for economic development in the short term for those countries? Sure. But there was also serious debt overhang there that China was using to create diplomatic leverage. And we were falling behind the ball. Well, this is getting turbocharged now. Now China is stepping in to fill public health voids that are existentially important for these governments. And I don't blame these governments for feeling like they have to play ball. I mean, if you're a leader of a country where your population is dying because of COVID and you don't have access to vaccines until 2023, you're going to do business with the purveyor of vaccines. It should be the United States. It should be our chance to restart 21st century foreign policy with America as the world's moral beacon, as opposed to the Chinese Communist Party. So
how do we do that? We've already given $4 billion to COVAX. Is there more money that needs to go? And what are some of the things we need to do?
Well, I will answer that with a specific example. There is a company in my own state of Massachusetts called National Resilience. National Resilience is founded and run by some of the smartest, most talented scientists and biotech entrepreneurs in the world. And what they want to do is create a network of high-end vaccine manufacturing spaces throughout the country that at all times will have some set of commercial contracts so that they can cover their own overhead, but always have bandwidth for the federal government to come in and place huge orders at a surge times, so that we basically have a strategic national stockpile of vaccines, not literally sitting there for a lot of reasons, including that biologics are perishable, but a market-based strategic national stockpile. we should be investing in companies like that. And we should be doing it really fast and really big.
Mm-hmm. And I guess money is what's standing in the way of that.
I'm actually not sure that it is money. I think it's more imagination, which is why I wrote this op-ed in CNN to get this conversation started. We have spent $1.9 trillion just on the latest installment of COVID relief. We're about to spend close to $2 trillion on physical infrastructure and potentially another $2 trillion on human capital investments. We are not in a stage right now in Washington where there's a lot of politicians who are afraid to make big, bold investments. And I'm a big supporter of that. I think we're in a time right now in our country's history where we do need to be making big, bold investments. I do think it's that this is just very new. And this type of public-private partnership has not really been implemented before in the United States. So it just takes time to create the legal and political framework around it.
What concerns you most going forward?
One, that COVID becomes endemic to large swaths of the world. And we basically create two parallel tracks for geoeconomic development. One track of countries that have COVID totally under control, herd immunity, they start trading and especially traveling kind of within their own sphere. And then another track of countries that don't have it under control and are basically relegated to a second-tier playing field. I don't think I've got to convince our listeners of why that's a bad thing for this world. We already are suffering from gross economic inequality, and this would only exacerbate that. So I don't want a two-tier playing field based on COVID. And then we have, of course, at this point, the ubiquitous and ever-present threat of further zoonotic diseases. This is not probably going to be the last time that mammals share diseases with one another. We've got to be ready for it. That means the kind of investments that I'm talking about, but it also just means broader scale public health infrastructure.
Because if we don't do that, we're just back where we started.
We're back where we started. I mean, I think there will be some lessons learned that we can take with us to the next one. I don't think there'll be as much mask hesitancy the next time around. I don't think we'll be closing schools for a year the next time around. But we will absolutely be back on our heels if we don't prepare.
Jake Auchincloss, thank you so much for joining me.
I appreciate you having me on.
Public Health on Call is produced by Josh Sharfstein, Lindsay Smith-Rogers, and Stephanie Desmond. Audio production by Spencer Greer, Niall Owen McCusker, C.N. Oates, and Matthew Martin, with support from Chip Hickey. Distribution by Nick Moran. Production support from Catherine Ricardo and Neiman Outland. Social media support from Brenda Haggader, Grace Holes Fernandez, and Caroline Wong. Thank you for listening.